Andy was just 19, young, restless, and full of promise when his uncle's family brought him into their home. They loved him, trusted him, and only wanted to help. But what they didn't know was that the same boy they took in with love would one day do the unimaginable evil that would break them forever. Because sometimes the people you bring closest are the ones sent to break you. And what he did to his own 9-year-old nephew left an entire community screaming in horror. Once upon a time, in a quiet village surrounded by dusty roads and old trees, there lived a poor widow named Mama Andy. She was a good woman, humble, hard-working, respected by all, but her biggest worry in life was her son, Andy. He was her only child, her only hope. And though she tried to raise him right, life in the village had become too difficult. Her late husband had died young, leaving her with debts and a small house that barely stood after the rains. Every night she would sit outside on a wooden stool watching her son's silhouette fade into the dark paths of the village and whisper a quiet prayer. "Lord, please, don't let my child end up like those boys on the street." Andy was not a bad boy, just restless. He wanted more from life, but there was no clear path for him to get it. One day, Mama Andy decided to visit her relatives who visited the village from the city, her late husband's elder brother and his family. They were well-to-do, kind, educated, living in a comfortable house with their 2 children. That day, she knelt before them, holding back tears. "Please, help my boy," she begged softly. "Take him with you. Let him learn. Let him grow. He's all I have, and I can't afford to let him waste like this in the village." Her relatives exchanged looks of compassion. After a moment, her brother-in-law, Uncle Dennis, sighed and said, "Don't worry, Mama Andy. We'll take him. He'll live with us. We'll treat him like our own son." And true to his word, they did. When Andy arrived in the city, everything felt new. The bright lights, the noise, the tall buildings. It was overwhelming, but exciting. He was polite, quiet, and obedient. Dennis's wife, Nana, would often smile and say, "Andy is such a good boy. He helps me in the kitchen and never complains." Their 9-year-old son, Ibuka, adored him. Everywhere Andy went, Ibuka followed. He'd tug on his shirt and say, "Uncle Andy, wait for me." It was beautiful to watch, like the brotherhood Andy never had. At night, when the family gathered around the dinner table, his uncle would pray, "Lord, thank you for bringing Andy into our home. Please help him to grow and succeed." And for a while, it seemed that prayer was working. Andy was focused. He helped around the house, fetched groceries, even joined the family for church services. He smiled often. He laughed easily. He was grateful. But sometimes, late at night, when everyone was asleep, he'd sit by the window, staring out at the glowing city streets, his eyes distant, his heart heavy. One thing was eating him up. He wanted more. He wanted to live like those boys in the city he saw driving flashy bikes and wearing gold chains. He didn't know what they did, but he knew one thing. He wanted that life too. And soon the city began to whisper to him. Whispers that promised money. Whispers that promised freedom. Whispers that began leading him straight into what he didn't quite understand yet. Would lead him straight to ruin. And 3 months later, everything began to change. At first, it was small things. Andy started dressing differently. He started wearing tighter jeans, flashy shoes, and expensive perfume he couldn't afford. Then, he began keeping strange friends, boys who hung around at street corners, smoking and laughing loudly. They were older, rough-looking but confident. They made him feel like he belonged. His uncle, Dennis, noticed first. One evening, when Andy walked in late, he called him gently. "Andy, you've been coming home too late these days. What's going on?" Andy smiled faintly. "Sorry, sir. We had a lot of work at the shop today. It was the same excuse every time." Just a few weeks back, the family had enrolled him in a spare parts apprenticeship, a reputable workshop not too far from their home. The idea was simple. If he wouldn't continue school, at least he could learn a trade and build a future. At first, Andy seemed happy about it. He'd wake early, iron his clothes, and leave with his toolbox. But gradually, his attitude changed. He started leaving late, coming home later, and sometimes not returning at all until almost midnight. When his aunt Nana tried to confront him, it only made things worse. "Andy, this is not the life we brought you here for," she said one night, her voice trembling with disappointment. "Look at yourself. You're losing focus. Your uncle is doing everything to make sure you succeed, but you're throwing it away." He didn't even look at her. "Auntie, please, I'm not a child. Stop controlling me," he blurted. Nana was shocked. It was the first time he had ever spoken to her that way. Her husband, Uncle Dennis, intervened later that night. "Andy," he said calmly, "I've been patient with you. I'm trying to give you a future. I even plan to send you back to school. Why are you behaving like this?" Andy looked down, silent. Then, in a cold voice, he replied, "School is not for me, Uncle. I'm very much okay in what I am doing." The words hit like a slap. His uncle sighed deeply. "Then focus on the apprenticeship. Learn that business. In a few years, you can have your own big shop." Andy nodded, pretending to hear, but he had other plans, ones no one in the family could imagine. He had met a group of boys who promised him quick riches. They told him he didn't need school, he didn't need trade, he just needed connection. At first, he laughed it off, but the more they spoke, the more he listened. They told him stories of others who made it overnight, boys his age who now drove cars and wore designer shoes. They didn't say what they did, only that it was the brotherhood way. Those words stuck in his head. The brotherhood way. He started skipping work to hang out with them. He began spending money mysteriously, money no one knew where it came from. Sometimes he'd buy new clothes and claim someone dashed him. Other times he'd sneak out with his phone, smiling at odd hours, whispering into the receiver, "I'm ready. Just tell me what to do." But the family didn't know. To them, Andy was just becoming a difficult teenager. The warning signs were there, but they were quiet, subtle, easy to ignore. His eyes looked different now, cold, restless, and distant. When his uncle spoke, he barely listened. When little Ibuka tried to play with him, he brushed him aside. The bond they once shared was fading, replaced by something dark and unrecognizable. And yet the family still believed he would change. They still prayed for him every night, not knowing that those prayers were already too late. Because by that time, Andy had already crossed the line. He had joined the group. He had made a pledge. And soon, they would call him to prove his loyalty in the most deadliest way. And that soon came one faithful day no one ever imagined. It was a bright weekday morning, ordinary, quiet, peaceful. The kind of day when everything seems normal, when danger hides behind routine. The sun was high, and the streets buzzed softly with the sound of traders and car horns. In the house, only the maid and little Ibuka, the family's 9-year-old son, were home. His parents had gone to work earlier that morning, trusting that the house was safe, as it had always been. Andy was supposed to be at the spare parts shop, busy learning his trade. But that day, he left the house, claiming he'd gone, but he didn't go. He had made up his mind. Around noon, the front door opened quietly. The maid, folding clothes in the living room, turned and blinked in surprise. "Andy? You're back early today?" He smiled, calm, collected, and even cheerful. "Yes. Auntie Nana said I should take Ibuka to Auntie Favor's place to collect something." The maid frowned lightly. "But, Madam didn't tell me. She called me directly," Andy said without hesitation, his eyes steady. "She said we should hurry before traffic starts." Nothing about his tone sounded strange. No sign of nervousness, just a young man carrying out an errand from his aunt. The maid nodded, relieved. "All right, take care of him. And please don't stay too long." "Yes, Ma," he replied, smiling faintly. Then he turned to the small boy who had been playing with his toy car near the sofa. "Ibuka, let's go." The little boy looked up and grinned. He adored his older cousin. Whenever Andy called him, he dropped everything and followed. "Where are we going?" Ibuka asked, bouncing excitedly. "To Auntie Favor's house," Andy replied, gently taking his hand. "Your mummy said we should collect something." The boy nodded innocently, his slippers flapping against the tiled floor as they left. The maid watched them walk out, Andy holding Ibuka's hand, both laughing, chatting, disappearing down the street like brothers. She smiled to herself, then continued folding clothes. There was nothing strange about it. After all, Andy had always been part of the family. But that moment, that simple walk out the door, would later become the turning point of everything. Because that was the last time anyone in that house ever saw Ibuka alive. Hours passed. The house stayed silent. The sun dipped into the evening sky, painting the streets gold. Still, there was no sign of Andy or the boy. By 6:30 p.m., the sound of a car pulling into the compound broke the silence. Nana had returned from work, smiling tiredly as she entered the house. She placed her bag on the couch, kicked off her heels, and smiled at the maid. "Diane, how was today? Where's Ibuka?" The maid, cheerful, replied casually, "He went out with Andy. You sent him to Auntie Favor's place, right?" The smile on Nana's face faded instantly. "Send him? Who said so?" "I never sent anyone." Diane frowned, confused. "He said you called him." "That you told him to take Ibuka to collect something." Nana's hands trembled. Her voice rose. "I didn't call Andy. I didn't send anyone." For a moment, the room went still. Even the air felt heavy. "When?" Nana said slowly. "When did they leave?" "Around noon," the maid stuttered. "He said you told him to hurry before traffic." Nana's heart dropped. She grabbed her phone immediately and dialed Andy's number. It rang once, then switched off. She tried again. Nothing. She called his other number. It was also switched off. By now, her voice was shaking. "Call your Oga," she said to the maid. "Tell him to come home. Now." Within minutes, her husband Dennis rushed in, confused and anxious. "What's going on?" "Andy took Ibuka out," Nana cried. "He said I sent them to Auntie Favor's house, and I never did." "He what?" The man's eyes widened. "You didn't send them?" "No!" she shouted, her voice breaking. The air in the room shifted, from worry to fear. They began calling friends, neighbors, anyone who might have seen them. They called Auntie Favor. She was shocked. "What? I haven't seen Andy or Ibuka." Dennis's breathing became heavy. He grabbed his car keys. "We need to search." Now they drove from street to street, stopping at every corner, asking people, showing pictures. "Please, have you seen this boy? He left with his cousin around noon." But everyone shook their heads. Hours turned into night. The once lively home became a house of panic. Phones kept ringing. Neighbors gathered. Prayers started. By 10 p.m., the father called the police. He explained everything. His voice shook as he spoke. "Please, we can't find our son. He left with my nephew. His phone is off. Please help us." The officer on duty took down details and promised to alert the patrol units. But as midnight came and went, there was still no word. Nana couldn't stop pacing, clutching her rosary, whispering, "God, please bring my boy home. Please bring my boy home." Dennis sat on the couch, motionless. His eyes were empty, and his fists clenched. Their maid sobbed in the corner. By morning, the police arrived to take a statement. They collected pictures of both boys, asked questions, and assured the family that a search team had been deployed. The father printed copies of Ibuka's photo himself and handed them out to people on the street. "Please, if you see this boy, call this number." The neighbors joined in. Shop owners, traders, bike riders, everyone helped. For 2 whole days, the city buzzed with the story of the missing child. Whispers spread through the community. The boy who left with his cousin and never returned. Rumors filled the air. Some said they saw them at a junction, others claimed they boarded a tricycle heading toward the outskirts. No one knew what really happened, but deep down, the mother's heart was already breaking. She could feel something dark in her spirit. Something wasn't right. On the 3rd morning, her phone rang. It was the police. The officer's tone was cold and heavy. "Madam, please come to the station. We found something. You need to come right away." Naina's body went numb. The phone slipped from her hand. "They found something," she whispered. "What? What does that mean?" her husband asked, his voice trembling. But she couldn't speak. She already knew. Something terrible had happened, or so she thought. They rushed into the car, their hearts pounding, minds racing. As they drove, the roads felt endless. By the time they reached the station, the officer met them with tired eyes. "We found your nephew," he said quietly. "Where's my son?" Naina asked quickly. The officer's lips tightened. He looked away. "Please come with us," he whispered. They followed him into a van, silent and terrified. Again, as they drove, the ride felt like forever. Every second felt heavier than the last. Finally, the vehicle stopped near an old, abandoned building on the outskirts of town. The area was quiet, eerily quiet. A few officers stood by, their faces grim. The father stepped out first. His legs felt weak, and his voice shook as he spoke. "Where's my son?" The officer pointed slowly toward the building. "Sir, you need to prepare yourself." And at that very moment, Naina screamed, trying to run forward, but the police held her back. "No! Let me see my boy! Let me see him!" But when they finally entered that building, what they saw in there shook everyone to their bones. Inside, sitting on the ground, was Andy. His hands were covered in dried blood, his eyes were empty, and beside him was a small sack. When the officers opened it, the world stopped. The scene was pure horror. It wasn't what anyone ever expected they'd see. There, inside the sack, was the unthinkable. It was the remains of 9-year-old Ibuka. The little boy was not just killed by someone he called his uncle. His body was butchered, with his remains packed into that sack. The victim's mother, Naina, collapsed. The father, Dennis, fell to his knees, screaming. The maid, Diane, fainted. The officers looked away. Some cried silently. Even the hardest men among them couldn't hold it together. It was too much to comprehend, too horrifying to believe. The officer in charge stepped forward, shaking with rage. "Andy!" "What did you do?" But Andy didn't respond. He didn't speak. He just stared blankly ahead. His eyes were cold and detached. The officer frowned. "Answer me." Still, Andy didn't say a word. This time, he bowed his head and kept his eyes low. The officer clenched his fists in disgust. The silence that followed was so heavy, even the wind outside seemed to stop. And that was when everyone finally understood. The 19-year-old boy Naina's family took in with love had become something else entirely. He wasn't the same Andy they once knew. He had become a stranger and a bloodied killer, and no one ever suspected. No one saw it coming. The police took him, hands tied, and shoved him into their van, and they drove off. Back at the police station, the interrogation room was quiet, cold, filled with the smell of fear and disbelief. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering weakly as if afraid of the darkness that now filled the room. Andy sat in the center, handcuffed, head bowed, eyes blank. Across from him, 2 officers stared, unsure how to even begin. One of them, A middle-aged man with a tired face leaned forward and said softly, "Young man, we want to understand. Why? Why would you do that to your own family?" At first, there was silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the fan turning lazily above. Then slowly, Andy lifted his head. His eyes were empty. Not the eyes of a 19-year-old boy anymore, but of someone whose soul had been swallowed. Swallowed by something evil. He spoke quietly, each word cutting through the room like a blade. "They said I should." The officer frowned. "Who are they?" Andy's lips curved into a faint, strange smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "My brothers, my group." The younger officer glanced at his colleague uneasily. "Which group?" Andy leaned back. His voice was calm, chillingly calm. "The fraternity. They found me, said they could make me rich and powerful, said I'd never have to beg anyone again." He paused, as if reliving the memory. "They told me all I had to do was prove my loyalty. Just one thing. Bring a life. Someone close. Someone innocent." The room went still. Even the officers, hardened men who had seen the worst of humanity, looked horrified. "A life?" the senior officer asked. "You mean, you killed that little boy because they told you to?" Andy nodded slowly, his voice void of emotion. "Yes. They promised me 2 million naira. They said after that, everything I touch would prosper. They said I'd have power and I'll blow." He spoke like he was describing a normal errand. No guilt, no tears, no regret. Only darkness. "So you chose him," one of the officers whispered, his voice trembling. "Why? Why would you choose your own nephew?" Andy looked down at his hands. "He trusted me," he murmured. "He wouldn't scream. He followed me easily. A pin could drop at that moment. Even the ticking wall clock sounded loud." "Why, Andy?" the officer asked again, louder now, slamming his hand on the table. "That boy called you uncle." "He loved you." Andy blinked slowly, as if the words meant nothing. "They said if I didn't do it, they'd kill me." "I didn't have a choice." The officer stared at him, his anger faded into disbelief. He could tell this boy was lost. Whatever part of him that knew right from wrong was already gone. When the confession was written down and signed, the officers called the DPO. News spread like wildfire. By evening, the story had reached every corner of the neighborhood. Crowds gathered outside the station, angry, grieving, desperate to understand how something so monstrous could happen inside a family's home. Meanwhile, back in the village, chaos had broken loose. Neighbors filled the compound. Some prayed, some wailed. Others sat in silence, shaking their heads. Andy's mother was inconsolable. Her cries echoed through the walls like thunder. "What did I do wrong?" she screamed, hitting her chest. "I begged for help. I only wanted my son to have a better life. Why, God, why?" She fell to the ground, clutching her son's picture, sobbing until her voice broke. One of the elderly uncles in their family sat by the window, unmoving. He had not spoken for hours. His eyes were swollen, but dry. The kind of silence that comes when pain goes beyond tears. Finally, in a cracked whisper, he said, "We brought a snake into our home." His wife turned to him, trembling. "Don't say that." "It's the truth," he replied hollowly. His mother, with our family's support, helped raise him, fed him, and loved him. We trusted him with our brother's child, and he took that trust and used it to destroy us. Mama Andy broke down again, clutching his legs, sobbing uncontrollably. Outside Dennis's home, people murmured among themselves. Disbelief and fear filled the air. How could he do this to his own blood? He lived with them, ate their food. Evil has no face anymore. Children were pulled closer by their parents. Doors were locked earlier that night. No one felt safe anymore. At the station, Andy sat alone in his cell. The confession had been recorded, but he didn't ask for food or water. He just sat there, humming quietly to himself, the kind of eerie hum that made even the officers refuse to guard his cell alone. One officer muttered to another, "This boy doesn't even look possessed. He looks empty." The other nodded. "That's the scariest part." As the night deepened, a storm began outside. Lightning flashed across the sky, and thunder rolled like the earth itself was mourning. In a nearby corner of the city, the cult members who had lured him vanished without trace. The police searched, but found no one. It was as if the Brotherhood had never existed, leaving only Andy to face the weight of his actions. Back at home, the family prepared for the burial. The little boy's small coffin arrived the next morning, white and too light for what it carried. Nana clung to it, screaming his name again and again, as if her voice could bring him back. Dennis stood over the coffin, whispering, "You didn't deserve this, my son. You trusted the wrong person, and I trusted the wrong blood. After everything we did for him, this is the evil he repaid us with." The entire street wept with them. Even those who never knew the boy felt the pain, the deep, unexplainable ache that only innocence lost can bring. Everywhere, people asked the same haunting question: how could he do this to his own blood? But there was no answer, only silence, the kind that follows when evil hides behind the face of family. The news spread like wildfire across the city. The 19-year-old boy who killed his nephew has been charged with murder. Every radio station, every gossip group, every street corner whispered the same name: Andy. To many, he had become a symbol of evil. Not a boy, not a relative, just a cold-hearted monster. Days after the arrest, the court proceedings began. The police van arrived outside the courthouse under heavy security. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, and in the middle of it all, Andy was dragged out, handcuffed, barefoot, and expressionless. His once neat hair was rough and tangled, his white shirt was stained with dirt, and though he looked frail and young, there was no trace of innocence left on his face. People from all over had gathered, not out of curiosity, but out of fury. Mothers held their children tighter as he passed. Fathers clenched their fists in disgust. Some spat, some cursed, and others threw stones, screaming, "Murderer! Evil child! You'll rot in jail." He didn't react. He didn't even flinch. He walked quietly, surrounded by officers, his face like a blank page, empty, emotionless, gone. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. The judge sat sternly, looking down at the file before him. The prosecutor read the charges clearly and firmly. The accused, Andy Nanati, age 19, is hereby charged with the murder of a minor, one Ebuka Nadi, age 9 years old, and with active involvement in a cult organization. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The words sounded heavy, like chains clinking in the air. When asked if he had anything to say in his defense, Andy raised his head slowly. His voice was low, barely audible. "I didn't mean to kill him. I just wanted the money." Gasps filled the room. Some people began to cry. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The judge's face remained unreadable, but his voice was firm, cold, and final. "You were given love, shelter, and care. Yet, you chose darkness. You took the life of a child, one who trusted you, one who looked up to you. For such cruelty, there is no justification." He looked at him sternly and continued, "Andy Nanati, this court finds you guilty of murder and cult association. You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole." The gavel struck. The sound echoed across the courtroom like thunder. The room erupted in murmurs and cries. And for the first time since his arrest, Andy's face cracked. He began to cry. Not for the boy he killed, not for the family he destroyed, but for himself, for the future he had thrown away, for the life he would never live again. He screamed as the officers dragged him out. But it was too late. The boy he killed was gone. and the world that once welcomed him with open arms now wanted nothing to do with him. That was how a mother's hope became her curse, and a family's kindness became their greatest tragedy, and a 19-year-old boy, full of potential, became a prisoner for his own horrific action. Lesson from this story. This isn't just a story. It's a mirror to real life. It reminds us that evil doesn't always come with horns or dark shadows. Sometimes it comes smiling, calling you uncle, brother, or son. It teaches us to be careful who you let into your home. Not everyone who calls you family carries love in their heart. Sometimes the devil wears a familiar face and comes disguised as a relative. Parents, uncles, aunties, be vigilant. Your kindness is noble, but it must come with discernment, because not everyone you help will repay you with gratitude. Some will repay you with grief. And to every young person listening, no shortcut in life is worth your soul. What seems like fun today can destroy everything tomorrow. Evil doesn't start with murder. It starts with one wrong friendship, one bad choice, and one ignored warning. So be wise, be content, and choose peace over pleasure, because peace lasts longer. Did you learn something from this story? Do you think the family could have noticed the red flags earlier? If you were little Ebuka's mother, Nana, would you ever forgive yourself for bringing him into your home? Have you ever heard or seen a story like this? And why do you think so many young people are still falling into cults and evil practices, even after seeing how these stories end? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to African Tales by Emade, where real stories meet real lessons, and every tale reminds us that evil isn't always from strangers. Sometimes it's from the ones you call your own.